Hello, everyone, and thank you, everyone, for joining us at CPP Investments' first Sustainability Forum. I'm pleased to have so many people. I can see over 300 have joined us this morning, and certainly sustainability-related factors are investment risks and investment opportunities, and it is important for everyone at CPP Investments to be knowledgeable about sustainability as we incorporate it to drive future value and future returns. To achieve this, we need to start building broad fluency and literacy in sustainability across the organization, which is one of the reasons we've been hosting the forum this week, which brings us to our conversation today. And I'm very excited and pleased to introduce David Blood, one of the preeminent global leaders on sustainable investing and a founding partner of Generation Investment Management. So about 2 decades ago, David and his partners saw an opportunity to create a firm that would bring together investment professionals and sustainability experts, and brought together really a shared passion to link business decisions with components of sustainability, and a mission to ensure sustainable investing drives the transformative change required for a net zero, prosperous, equitable, healthy, and safe world. So today, Generation has 34 billion of assets under management, and we're very proud to be one of the investors. And as you'll hear today, David believes that when businesses think long-term and sustainably, robust economies will develop. And we're very grateful for David to be here today. And David also recently participated in a panel with our board of directors and our senior management team when we had our board for our London offsite. So we're very appreciative of the time you spent with CPP Investments over the past couple months. So I'd ask everyone to please join me virtually in welcoming David to our inaugural Sustainability Forum. And we're thrilled that you joined us this morning. And maybe just get started, and if you could just introduce yourself to our colleagues from across CPP Investments.
Well, thank you very much, John, and it's really an honor to be a part of the conversation today. You can tell by my gray hair, I've been in finance now for quite some time, over 40 years, including a stint at Goldman Sachs for 18 years. I was ultimately responsible for the asset management business at Goldman Sachs. And then, as John mentioned, 20 years ago, with a group of 6 other partners, 7 of us founded Generation. And I'll talk a little bit about how we thought or why we founded Generation and what we thought about Generation. But when John and I were talking the other day, he suggested that I tell a little bit of a story about how I ended up in finance in the first place. And I think when I talk to my colleagues, when I meet them for the first time, I often will say that I'm probably the least likely person to be in finance in the room, and that's probably true on this call as well. When I went to university, I went to be a teacher. All of my mentors and people I looked up to, and my mom, in fact, was a teacher, and so I thought, well, I should be a teacher. I should be a history teacher or football coach or something along those lines, and that was really what I thought I would be doing. The other choice was, by the way, a forest ranger. And ultimately, sort of the second year of university, they discontinued the education department. And so I had to look around for another discipline or another major. And my major actually is in child psychology, which is incidentally the perfect discipline to manage investment bankers and investment managers over the years, I've discovered. And when I basically was coming to graduation, I didn't have a job. I had applied to the Peace Corps, which is a volunteer group, and I had been rejected. I applied to get my PhD in psychology. Nobody would take me. And so my dad basically phoned up and said, you cannot come home. You've got to get a job. You should apply to banks. They would hire people like you. And I am pretty sure that that wasn't meant to be a compliment, people like you. And so I applied to 70 banks in the United States and was rejected by 69 of them, and ultimately got a job at Bankers Trust in the early 1980s. And that's how I ended up in finance. And so it's sometimes, I guess, some people I'm sure on the call knew they wanted to be investors from the very beginning. I confess I didn't know that from the very beginning. It has taken a little while to find my feet, but I certainly would say that being in a position today to work in a very, very competitive, really interesting business, but also have mission and purpose is a real blessing. And I feel like my experiences at Goldman Sachs have given me the ability to help build a generation in a way that perhaps I wouldn't have been able to do had I not spent 18 years at Goldman Sachs.
And what was it at Goldman Sachs while you're working there that drew you to sustainable investing?
So I was always interested. I grew up in Michigan, in Detroit, and I also grew up in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And so I have always been quite interested in social justice and sustainable development and poverty. And that's why I applied to the Peace Corps. And perhaps that's why I was interested in teaching. So it was an interest of mine all along. And actually in the early 2000s, when the capital markets saw a number of failures, Enron, WorldCom, a handful of failures were failures of governance and other challenges. So we began to, at Goldman Sachs Asset Management, to think about governance, and then we began to think more broadly about other factors that might be relevant to deploy, relevant as you're deploying capital. And so the notion to think about sustainability goes back to when I was 10 years old, but the notion to actually deliver it into an investment process is probably 25 years old from my perspective. The other thing I should say, I was one of the partners who voted to stay private at Goldman Sachs. I felt that it would be a terrible mistake for Goldman Sachs to go public. I was very passionate about the original business principles and culture of Goldman Sachs, and I was certain that going public would change how the firm operated and the culture of the organization. So even things like culture and understanding how people work was something that I felt very strongly about from the very beginning of my career, and remains an important pillar of sustainability, actually, from our perspective.
And with generation, and we talked about previously, it's somewhat of a pure play sustainable investment manager. What does it actually mean?
So it's a really important question, and let me answer that question, but also go back and explain why we established generation in the first place. The reason why we're very clear that we're a pure play sustainable investing manager is because, first of all, we are. That's all that we do. But secondly, we're trying to make the point that we believe that sustainability, and I'll talk about our investment framework here in a second, is a driver of economies, and is therefore extremely relevant to industry, economies, and by extension, investors. And so that's, by saying we're a pure play sustainable investing manager, we're making a statement that we think sustainability matters to how businesses and economies operate. And we don't have two strategies. I often get, I confess, a little bit amused when I sit on a number of investment committees, and we see a manager come in and we'll say, well, here's our sustainable investing strategy, but if you don't like that, we have our regular global equity strategy. And so as soon as you have two strategies, you're sending a signal that actually sustainability isn't a business driver, it isn't an economic driver, it's actually a marketing perspective. And when we set up Generation, we had three sort of principles of how we thought about investing. The first is, and I know this resonates with CPPIB, is that long-term investing is best practice. There's no question about that. We've known that for a long while. Secondly, as I mentioned, sustainability, we believe, and I'll come back to define it here in a second, is a driver of economies. And as a long-term investor, you need to understand the broader implications of sustainability challenges. And again, for us, sustainability are issues like climate and the environment and nature, biodiversity, but it's also about communities. It's also about people. It's also about culture. It's also about health. It's about basically social justice and human rights. So these are issues that are driving economies, are increasingly interlinked, and are relevant to the success of economies. And that for us, environmental social governance factors, and incidentally, ESG didn't exist 20 years ago when we started. So we didn't set ourselves up to be an ESG investor. We set ourselves up to be a sustainability investor, but we use ESG as tools to help us understand the quality of business and quality of management. And so we integrate sustainability and ESG into our investment process. And those are two, I think, important points I'd like to share with colleagues is that, one, we don't think of sustainability as separate to investing. We integrate sustainability into a traditional rigorous investment process, both publicly and privately. And we think of sustainability holistically. It's not just climate. Climate's important, but it's a broad array of issues that we think drive value in economies and by extension, industries and companies.
Yeah, we'll get maybe to ESG and the backlash on ESG a little bit later. The new 3-letter word in
exactly.
And I'm in New York right now. I think it's especially in the U.S. where the pushback on ESG. It'd be great to get your perspective on that. But you did touch upon a little bit this, and maybe it's marketing, maybe it's how ESG has been sold into the marketplace of, we have a ESG or sustainability investment, and then we have just our regular, U.S. equities investments. I think inherent in that is a belief that there's a trade-off that's being made, either on returns or some other value creation dimension. And certainly at CPP Investments, this is one of the narratives that we're trying to fight through, is that there is a trade-off. And certainly Generation, being an investment manager, this is something that you must have to communicate all the time, is this belief that there's a trade-off that has to be made between investment returns and incorporating sustainability.
Well, we've always thought that, first of all, we think sustainable investing is best practice, and we believe it is a framework to deliver outstanding investment results. We've never thought that we were trading values for value. And from the very beginning, we have, so when we first started the firm, we really truly resisted being classified as a responsible investor or a socially responsible investor. We think we're responsible, incidentally, and socially responsible, but we wanted to and do compete in the mainstream of capital markets because we believe, again, this is best practice. And in fact, our ambition is to help make sustainability mainstream in the capital markets. 5% of our profits are allocated to Generation Foundation. We spend a significant amount of time on advocacy around why sustainability is relevant to capital allocation. And we can talk about climate in a little bit, but we fundamentally believe this is about driving economic value, long-term, but driving economic value. And I think one of the advantages that Generation has had versus maybe some of the early sustainability firms is, going back to Goldman Sachs, I was a partner at Goldman Sachs. I ran a really important investment management business. There are not that many socialists at Goldman Sachs. And so when we talk about sustainability as being a business driver, I'm very happy to go head to head with any of our colleagues, whether it be on this call or anybody in finance, because that's what I do. I've done finance for 40 years. I'm not just somebody has turned up and thought about sustainability as something we should do. This is actually a rigorous economic framework that we have worked 20 years on to develop, and our purpose is to deliver strong investment results, but to prove the business case that sustainability is best practice. And so John, I really couldn't underscore more strongly the importance of having this dialogue. And for most of the first 10 years of Generation, it was sitting with CIOs, CEOs, having this conversation to say, no, I know you think that we're negative screening. We're not. I know you think this is trading values for value, or we're putting what we think, like the woke capitalism, that we're imposing our views on portfolios. We're not. What we're trying to do is understand what's driving economies and what we think will make economies more robust, which we believe sustainability is a tool to help us do that.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's we'll get to the, as you highlighted, we'll get to the investment process in a moment, but even at the beginning, talking a little bit about what does it mean to be a long-term investor. And the amount of Generation has been around for a while, even to get your perspective on how the discussions with the CIOs, with the portfolio managers, has evolved specifically related to climate. I mean, in my time, when I was head of credit and now sitting in this seat, there's been a pretty big change even over the past 5 years on how people are thinking about climate and the incorporation of climate opportunities and risks into the investment process. But you've had a front row seat into that evolution of the discussion.
Well, the original sort of the first wave of green investing occurred in 2000, well, it's 2006, 7, 8, and I have to tell you, we were pretty sad by the way people went about it. There was this was just sort of around the global financial crisis, and then as we got out of the global financial crisis, people began to talk about solar and investing and green investing, and they fundamentally put away the traditional tools of finance. So when they were evaluating businesses, barriers for entry, for example, nobody thought about that. And so you had a series of really high-profile accidents. And then, of course, you had the U.S. government investing in a handful of businesses. Solyndra, it was a swear word in those years. And so I would say that up until so certainly for the first 10 years of generation, anybody that was talking about climate were pretty skeptical or anybody thinking about climate was pretty skeptical that it was about deploying capital in a very positive way, though sustainability was beginning to be understood. But to your point, we have noticed a very significant change in how people are thinking about climate really since 2016. And it started with the Paris Accord, where there was for the first time, the world came together and said, we are going to try to address the challenges of climate on a global scale. And that got people thinking. But I'll tell you that we have seen a much greater emphasis on, particularly at your level, the CEO, CIO level, today, over the last couple of years versus even 5 years ago. And I think part of it was the commitments that we collectively have made to decarbonize our portfolios, decarbonize our businesses. The COP26 with GFANS was founded with Governor Carney. A lot of these initiatives have brought focus to folks such as yourself to say, well, we've got to start thinking about it. But at the same time, the examples of businesses that are really interesting, the entrepreneurs as well as larger businesses who are driving the net zero discussion or net zero transition, these are some pretty interesting investment opportunities. And I was thinking about today's conversation, and I was thinking about what would I say to folks that if you could just remember one thing, I'll say it now, which is I think the transition to net zero, which includes both nature and people, but the transition to net zero will be the most significant economic opportunity, certainly in our lifetimes, and perhaps in economic history. And so this is about risk, but this is about investment opportunity. And I think that's why the large asset allocators, the large asset managers are saying, we really need to understand how we're going to think about this.
I think certainly there's been and maybe it's just due to the improvement in the literacy and the fluency. And as you highlighted, I think back 10 years ago, and people would make an immediate kind of association of sustainable investing to investing in renewables and really boxing it into wind, solar, or some other type of renewable opportunity. But the pennies dropped that as we think about this transition, it's an entire economy that has to transition. It's not just about renewables. And for us, as we think about our portfolio and our $575 billion portfolio, and thinking about within almost every company and asset within that portfolio, they will be exposed to the transition. That creates both risks and opportunities. And as stewards of that capital, we need to be able to navigate the portfolio through the transition. And as you said, that this will probably be one of the biggest investment opportunities in our lifetime. And so we talk about it kind of through the ensuring that sustainability is incorporated through the entire investment life cycle. And I know that's something that Generation has thought a lot about. So maybe kind of moving down to the investment process and how you think about the full life cycle of the investment process.
Yes. And so when we actually start and this is true for both our public and private portfolios, we actually start with what we call industry roadmaps. And we've done, I think, something in the order of 400 in the last 20 years.
Wow.
And what we're trying to do is understand what are the dynamics of different industries and what are the drivers of those industries, of which sustainability often is a critical driver. And that forms the basis of really identifying the types of businesses that we want to own. And because we're concentrated in both the public and the private markets, we don't have to own the market. We just need to own what we think are the best businesses that we think will generate important returns over time for our clients. And as we go through the process of understanding industries and then understanding companies, sustainability and ESG are integrated into how we assess basically industry dynamics or business dynamics or management dynamics. But we don't really say, and here's the sustainability assessment. It's integrated into our broader assessment of a business, our broader assessment of a company. We will look for what are the drivers of the industry, and often they may be sustainability drivers. And in some of our portfolios where we have commitments to drive very specific impacts, we will then say, well, what do those impacts look like, and how do we measure them, and how do we describe them to our clients? But we're always thinking of it in a holistic way, and I know that's something in our conversations together that's quite important from your perspective. We strongly agree with that. Sustainability isn't something that you sprinkle sustainability dust at the end. It's the whole process, and again, it's across all aspects of industry, all aspects of society. And the one thing I do want to say about sustainability and ESG, because it kind of is related to the backlash, we do say that we're not trading values for value. And we do strongly believe that we are driving value for our clients, but it's hard, for sure. And there are trade-offs, and sustainability or ESG, there often are in conflict with each other. And so if you're focused on net zero and how you're going to decarbonize the economy or a company or whatever, you will have implication. There will be impacts on other aspects of that you care about, whether it be community, about how you operate within the business itself. There may be governance challenges, and it doesn't serve you well to have a single number. You all may remember that. Yeah. Last year, Tesla was thrown out of an ETF because they changed the ratings, and of course, Elon Musk wasn't happy about that, and it seemed ridiculous that Tesla would not be considered a sustainable business given what they're doing to disrupt the automobile industry. On the other hand, Tesla has a series of other challenges, and it was just the weighting. But the point is that a single number for sustainability score makes no sense. And there are trade-offs, and you have to recognize, just like all aspects of investing, you're making judgments, assumptions of which you can be wrong often. And so the trick is to figure out when you're wrong and change your mind, and also learn from your mistakes.
Yeah, and I think we've had this conversation too, that as I think about CPP investments and how we incorporate sustainability related factors, and the team has spent a lot of time ensuring it's fit for purpose for CPP investments. We've invested the time, the energy, and the money to calibrate ES&G for CPP investments. And I think too often ESG is a product that is being sold, and people are inheriting someone else's kind of calibration when organizations need to, in some ways, do the hard work and think about where they should calibrate across these different factors. You mentioned 400 industry roadmaps. That's a lot.
Yes,
I don't know if you've named 400 industries, but
there's some repeats, and there's some governments and stuff. But yes,
any surprises? Which ones surprised you?
It's not what surprises us that we we look at, we often will look at what we got wrong.
Mm.
And I regret to inform you, we got a lot wrong, including what we thought to be a sustainable business. So among our clunkers, I'll say, one of them was we were an early investor in BP. When we founded Generation, BP was in the portfolio. It was in the portfolio because we felt that Lord Brown really believed that he needed to transition his business to net zero. You might recall that their slogan was beyond petroleum. There were a number of factors that we were interested in. And what we got wrong was timing and maybe even the business itself. But we realized ultimately that Lord Brown, while he probably does believe, in fact, I know he does because I know him, he wasn't able to bring his company along with him in terms of making this transition. But the point I'm trying to make is that what we think is a sustainable business or sustainability or a solution to a sustainability challenge, we get it right a lot, but not always. And that's because we're constantly reevaluating, constantly, and I know you are as well, constantly testing ourselves to sort of go beyond what is a sort of perceived wisdom and to really test circularity, to understand the whole life cycle, as you mentioned earlier, is critical. And that's going to be an important part of capital allocation over the course of the next couple of years, is that there are some challenges with the net zero transition. There's whether it be some mineral challenges or disposal challenges, and we've got to think those through. And if you don't, you're not investing sustainably. You're making a mistake. It's the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's so foundational to investing is to periodically go back, check, retest fundamental assumptions. And you say that everybody has investment beliefs. Every organization has investment beliefs. They often start out evidence-based and fact-based, and over time might drift to faith-based. It's important to double check everyone heuristics in this business. So we have almost 600 or maybe over 600 colleagues on the line. So it just shows how interested the organization is in the topic. As Generation, how do you embed sustainability into your operations and the one firm culture at Generation?
Well, it's a really important point for us because, as I said, we're a mission-driven organization. We are a B Corp. People work here for the mission. Everybody, this is a pretty competitive place externally. We certainly want to be considered among the best investors. This is about as rigorous an investment shop as you can imagine, but it just happens to have a second purpose, which is the mission around sustainability, which means that, particularly given some of the profile of our partners, if we are not walking the talk, it is not a good thing. When you state to people, you're a sustainability manager, that's all we do, that's all we'll ever do, you are making a statement that you must therefore be sustainable as a business yourself, both big S and little s. And so our operations, we report very clearly around our carbon footprint. We made a commitment that we would be net zero by 2040 in both our operations as well as our portfolio. Which is ahead of what others have done. We felt we had to do that. Now we're blessed. You have a much more difficult challenge by far, much more difficult challenge, because we manage $40 billion. And so, and we're focused, we're a boutique, but we felt that because we're focused, because we're a boutique and we could do it, we should do it. And so that's an example of how we think about the challenges of being sustainable and showing that we can be sustainable. Part of also what we're doing is ensuring that we're innovating on our strategies. Our Just Climate strategy, which you all are part of, is an important part of trying to change the way people think about climate-led investing. We have added impact reporting and impact performance into how we're assessing the quality of our portfolio and how we're compensating our colleagues. And then, of course, just within our own firm, one important aspect of our engagement is diversity, and clearly having a very, very diverse group of partners and colleagues is a critical part of what we're what we're doing. And I think today our leadership groups are somewhere between 45 and 50% women. And so we feel like we're doing what we're saying we're going to do, but not well enough. So in our public equity portfolios, we're sort of 35% women in terms of the senior leadership roles. And so we know that we have to do better. And so we try to be transparent. We try to be clear about what we are trying to do. And then we also hopefully are willing to say, and here's what we're not doing as well.
Yeah. And how do you think about business travel?
Well, that's a really good question, particularly since I've just come off of 3 overnight flights in the last 3 weeks. So we made a commitment that we're kind of keeping, but I worry a little bit about. We made a commitment that we would cut our travel in half versus 2019.
Okay.
And I think we're pretty good with that. So we're measuring it. We are absolutely reporting it, measuring it, reporting it. We do offset it when we travel, but that is by far our biggest carbon footprint is, well, our portfolios, but the second is travel. And so the way to deal with it is to cut it out or cut as much of it as you can. On the other hand, when we're working on behalf of our clients and we're deploying their capital, we need to go see these companies. And we're going to get on a plane or a train or rowboat or whatever, but we're going to go see these companies. And when we have important client conversations, we're going to come see our clients because you need to. And so I'd like to see air travel be a lot more sustainable, but for the moment, we need to use airplanes to fulfill our responsibilities.
Yeah. And you mentioned Just Climate, which I think is really interesting, and people would be quite interested to hear a little bit more about Just Climate, which is an investment business that you've launched that focuses on decarbonization. And it sounds to me, the way it's been described to me, is it's really kind of rolling up sleeves and having a competency to help companies in the decarbonization. Maybe share a little bit on Just Climate, how it's going, and what you've learned from the initiative.
Well, the important thing, as you said, is to sort of rethink how we're deploying capital, and we start with it being climate-led. And what we're trying to do is invest in the hard-to-abate sectors, and by definition, therefore, the highest impact industries that we can find. And we're doing it, though, within the context of wanting to deploy significant billions of dollars, not just from us, but to catalyze to solve these problems. And therefore we need to be focused on how to bring that together. So partnership is a clear priority in it. And interestingly, when we launched the fund officially, I think a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, we were launching it into a challenging time for fundraising, as you all well know, and we've been very, very pleased to say, and it's a first-time fund with the first-time team in some sense, they've come together, but we were able to raise $1.5 billion. And we had hoped to raise about $1 billion, but we cut it off at 1.5. And the reason why I think we were successful is that a lot of folks really wanted to understand how we are going to make these transitions and to be part of thinking a little bit differently in terms of some of the business opportunities or the catalyzing of capital. But I think also people realize, and for me, this is one of the magical aspects of Just Climate is, as we said, we basically priced it assuming that there isn't a carbon premium, i.e. that we don't transition as quickly as I think we are going to. If we do transition as quickly as I think we should do, assuming we do our job even halfway well, this is going to be a really interesting opportunity to deploy capital. And now we're going to start in nature. Nature will be the next strategy that we launch sometime in early 2024. We announced that we've opened up an office in São Paulo, Brazil, which is where I grew up, oddly enough. And we think that finding ways to catalyze capital not only to the hard to abate sectors, but to the the global south is going to be critical to achieving the broader objectives of net zero over the course of the next 5, 10, 15 years. So it's gone very, very well. We're blessed. Clara Barbie and Sean Kingsbury. Sean, I know, has great relationships with many colleagues at CPPIB. These are world-class people that are doing just amazing work that we've known for, in the case of Clara, I've known Clara for 20 years. So it's been great to bring these folks into our family.
You launched your 2023 Sustainability Trend Report last month. Encourage people to download it. What is one key takeaway you want to leave the audience with today from the trend report?
So if you do download it, you will notice it's about 80 pages, but there are ways to read it much more quickly. There's summaries, and so don't be threatened by the length of it. But it's really well written. It's written by a former New York Times journalist, Justin Gillis, and he's really truly amazing. So I think the one thing I would ask people to take away from is there's good news and different news. The good news is over the last 18 months, there's been significant progress in decarbonizing our economies. Part of that is due to the Inflation Reduction Act. Part of it is due to the challenges in Europe. But mostly it's due to the fact that we have really interesting entrepreneurs and business leaders driving down the cost of solar, for example. And we see clearly EVs are crashing through a tipping point. We're electrifying much more. So there's a lot to be happy about and really excited about. On the different news front is simply not enough. It's simply not enough. We are not on any pathway right now to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees C. In fact, we're on a pathway, I think it's 2.4 degrees C at this point. And that's making some heroic assumptions. So while there's a lot of good news, we do think we've seen a tipping point in terms of people finally realizing that this is a mainstream subject. It's going to require a lot more effort and transformation over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, which of course is a risk, but it's a huge opportunity for those of us who are deploying capital.
Well, David, thank you so much. With that, it really was a tour de force. I think we covered from investment perspective, and really just, I think really from a investing and thinking about incorporating into investing and driving investment returns. It was a fantastic conversation. On behalf of all my colleagues, really want to thank you for the partnership and thank you for the time today. I've been very generous with your time, so thank you. It's really amazing.
Well, my pleasure, and thank you for including me.